looked into it, and
Yeah.
they certainly don't know how powerful it is if they think, oh yeah, I've read my horoscope, I've seen my sun sign, and yet they don't realize that there's a full strength version. And not only that, but we have new planets,
Yeah.
and that is exciting because getting new planets is like we had our first digital pictures when and then I remember when someone showed me a digital picture first time, and I said, "Oh,
Mhm.
that's all pixelated." They said, "But it's digital, and
Yeah.
it's going to get better." And that was the thing,
Yeah.
and I couldn't recognize it's going to get better. It's going to look fantastic, but we need more density in those pixels, and the dwarf planets are those dense pixels that we're now picking up out there.
That's a really good
More
analogy.
dots in the matrix,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
And we didn't know. We only knew that Pluto was out there. We could see Pluto, and then suddenly, when we had made basically computerized, because Mike Brown and his people, who have been the ones that discovered the most of the
Yeah.
dwarf planets, the biggest ones, they used a computer to actually do all these see the most smallest changes in the photographs they were taking,
Mhm.
couple, I can't remember the name, couple charge scans or images.
Mm.
And then they said, oh, okay, something is there. And then they started looking at closely with their own eyes, and then focused in on it, said we could spend time in this area, and then they realized there was something there. And now we have even bigger, better telescopes like the James Webb, to show us that maybe there's even more. But these guys are quite a lot for us to take in now. But they're really giving us more definition about life and about personalities.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. They just add that extra layer of insight into the chart.
Yeah.
And it's just giving extra detail. And I do think that pixel analogy is absolutely brilliant. Yeah, that sort of really makes it clear. And I've been sitting for a while, sort of with our emails ping-ponging. And I've been,
Mm.
kind of like, what is the actual sort of benefit of dwarf planets, apart from adding the extra layer of insight and detail into the chart? But it's like, how do we bring people on board and convince them that it's worth the extra little bit of work, to integrate them into their sort of astrological toolkit? Because I think every astrologer has their own toolkit of what they use,
Hmm.
whether it's, houses or planets, whether it's traditional or modern, etc., etc. And that, to me, they're an essential part of my toolkit. So, how do we sell them, so to speak? And I don't want to make that sound flippant,
No, no, no.
but
How do
it's
you
like,
impress people? You got to impress them, and
absolutely.
either they look it up and say, either you say, look up your family, look up your life, and look where these things have been jostling around,
Mhm.
and when did Haumea square your sun, or when did or
Yeah,
square your ascendant, or did Maki Maki conjunct some personal planet, and what happened then? And you will
yeah,
know. That's the beauty of it.
yeah.
If an asteroid is going to do something, I mean, even if it's a big asteroid, it might be hard to remember if it's way long ago, but the day that Haumea squared your sun, or Maki Maki conjuncted your moon, you felt that, and you say, oh, that year, oh my God, that month, oh yeah, or there's probably a couple passes. So, but
Yeah.
if they're not going to do that, the only way you can, I think, is to show really big times that people have had questions about. And that's why, like, for example, with Haumea, one of the things that I made sure to do is Princess Diana, because I read, I stumbled upon these articles that nobody knew why Princess Diana died. And all they could come up with was, oh, it was Comet Hale Bopp. Hale Bopp, it was, the death of a king. Of course, she's a princess, but yeah, okay, death of royalty. And because they couldn't find it. And what it was is Haumea was square her Mercury or something, I think it was. I'm trying to recall exactly, but I put it in my book as there, you just didn't know Haumea. And
Mm-hmm.
Haumea, especially because and also this very bright dwarf planet called, it doesn't have a name, TX 300, which is the journalist planet. That was also on the other side. It was Haumea TX 300 square her Mercury, and it was also in her progression, in secondary progression, and that was the answer, and that should have been like, holy cow. But of
Yeah.
course, this just it seems to be running underneath the radar, even with me trying to whack people over the heads with it. I guess it got lost in my book, you know what I mean? If it got in Mountain of Astrologer, I don't know, maybe that would have been better. But the other one that I did for Maki Maki was, and this is what really got me excited, was back in 2001 when the terror attacks happened. I immediately did that chart, and I'm like, why now? Why now? And I didn't, for some reason, I didn't accept that the Saturn Pluto opposition around 12 mutable was enough for that sun at 17 Virgo. I just, or 17 or 18. And what it was is Maki Maki was at 17 Virgo. So I think it was 18 was the sun. And when I saw that, I said, okay, somehow this makes sense. And then as I went along and I saw that Maki Maki was conjunct the US sun in transit when Pearl Harbor happened, I realized it's this attack from above. It's this, it's either this intellectual thing that's really weirded out, or it's a literal attack from above, which is kind of almost like in the myth of the Birdmen in Easter Island. They used to go climb up these
Yeah.
cliffs and everything, and I
Yeah.
think there was some aerial component to it. I don't think they did.
Yeah.
Might have been doing dives off of it too, but maybe
Yeah.
not. Maybe that was the worry that they would fall off. But whatever it is, there was an aerial thing, especially with a bird involved.
Mm.
And with the bird involved, you have planes in both
Yeah.
instances.
Air attack.
Um,
Yeah.
and so I started to say, I mean, I knew something was completely weird and disturbing about it. Certain things I had stumbled in with my mother's life, and she wasn't a pilot or anything, but she was very unpredictable, and she could get like completely a little crazy when she got angry. But that wasn't enough to really give me a robust definition.
Mm.
But once I started to see it in these events, and also it was a little bit of shocking, like Alfred Hitchcock had Sun Square Maki Maki, and he did have the birds. The birds did attack in
Yeah.
one of his
Yeah.
movies, but he also did like to shock people. And so
Yeah.
that was more of a generalized thing. And not everything is going to be birds or planes raining down on you, but the fact of being startled or having something be unexpected, or
Mhm.
someone is unpredictable, that becomes a more generalized definition that you can work with when you say, this is what you're going to be faced. You're going to have some very unpredictable thing happen when you have this Maki Maki thing coming.
Yeah.
Uh, the US
So,
sun is about to have Maki Maki square it in a couple years.
yeah.
So
And it's would normally associate that sort of thing with Uranus, for example.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
But the way, from what you've just said, it makes me almost think of Maki Maki as a higher octave of Uranus,
Well, this is,
almost.
yeah, got it. You got it.
Yeah.
And it,
Yeah.
it is, and I think these things out there are extreme versions of more behaving planetary qualities that
Or
we've already know.
or are these planets the more pure form of the planets we already know. So Maki's been there all the time, for
Yes,
example,
that's
you
true.
know, and
That's true.
until we discovered in, was it 2004, 2005, something like that?
2005 at
Four,
Easter.
five, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's been there all the time. And the closest thing we had to that was Uranus, which we're absolutely familiar with. And of course, before the 1700s, when Herschel discovered that, we didn't know about Uranus. So we knew about Uranus. So is Uranus perhaps a watered down version of what is already out there in Maki?
Well,
Does that
I
make
just think it's
sense?
another a level because
Yeah, yeah,
you have machines came out and technology, right? And like a washing machine, wow, it's great. And a telephone, that's great,
yeah,
right? But now we have Maki, which is a cell phone. It does all sorts of things, not just one thing. There's the
exactly.
versatility of that. And so
Yeah.
it's a next step because before we had to have the machines for all sorts of separate tasks. And now, I mean, I can't wash clothes with the with the cell phone, but it's just so many things are now encapsulated in this, smaller device. It's just and which is unbelievable. If suddenly someone woke up that had been asleep for the last 20 years and you said, "Oh yeah, I'm going to call somebody and then I'm going to look something up," and they'd be like, oh my God,
And then
you're blowing my mind." And
and then
that's
I'm going to
Maki
pay all my
Maki.
bills. Plus, there's a torch on it. Then I'm going to watch a movie on it. Then yeah. Then I'm going to learn a foreign language on it. I'm going to go to
Right.
Duolingo. You know, but I'm kind of thinking, right? So if we sort of take the analogy that there is perhaps some divine source or divine creator, okay, that's let's just use that, okay.
Sure. Sure.
And as we evolve as a human race, okay, we there's only a certain speed that we can evolve at, because it just becomes too overwhelming, and we have to learn to adapt and utilize and cope with any form of new innovation. So if we take Maki as that higher octave of Uranus, and it's just ultra innovative and progressive, you know, a million times more so than Uranus. So Uranus is kind of like the baby Maki, so to speak. So as we evolve, we're introduced to the sort of more diluted forms of the energy. So we've been introduced to Uranus and the
Oh
Industrial
yeah. Yeah.
Revolution and all the progressions that came with Uranus. Okay. Then now we're sort of thinking about Maki as a more potent form of Uranus. But if we'd been introduced to Maki, what, 100 years ago, we wouldn't have been ready in our
Well,
evolutionary
it's
state.
before its time. I mean, but
Yeah,
there were people that were doing were Makian, but they were just so ahead of their time. Like Frankenstein, the book came out at Sun conjunct Maki, and that is actually also uses electricity. All the
yeah,
electricity people like Edison and Tesla and even
yeah,
Franklin had the trine, Sun trine Maki, and uh what was the other one? Anyway, all these people had Maki, where and in Edison's case, he didn't have any Uranus conjunctions or significant relations to his personal planets, and I felt that's why wouldn't that be if Uranus was so instrumental to electricity? But no, it's Maki is more of that electricity or the electrons and
yeah,
going down into the very small and difficult to understand kinds of technology.
yeah.
But
And
but you're right, we weren't prepared.
no, absolutely not. So I'm just wondering if we discover these planets at the right time, and
Yeah.
we're slowly introduced to the nature of it. So we're now familiar with Uranus sort of energy. And as we get more familiar and hopefully work more with Maki, that takes us to the next level. And
Mhm.
then there's probably going to be another level of Maki beyond somewhere, which is, I don't know, way beyond what we can even consider now. So I'm kind of
Yeah,
thinking
and it makes sense because we're thinking about, beings that won't even be human, the AI part,
exactly.
which I think is very Machian right now, of course,
Mm,
but in fact, they're so intimidating to so many people that you have very, very smart people who are terrified of them, right? They're terrified. They're going to destroy us. They're going to see
yeah,
us right through us, and then boom.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Which is not necessarily the case. I mean, there's a lot of people that are working against that thought. I
Mm,
have a personal friend who's been doing talks about we need to teach them just like we would teach any being who is come incarnated and then is needs to fit into society.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, absolutely. And that kind of brings me back to one of the things I talked about in my talk at the AA conference, Google DeepMind.
yes, yes, that was
That,
great.
yeah, the Google labs where they're sort of developing the AI and they're using AI to help unfold the protein folding problem, which scientists have been working on for years and years and years. And that's really going to take us so fast forward in the understanding of genetics and medicine, et cetera, et cetera. But I mentioned in that talk that the AI was taught. So they're actually teaching the AI, and
Yeah.
it's yeah, and that sums up exactly what we've just been saying now. It's absolutely fascinating. So I said because, and then that brings me back to this discussion we had on email about Pluto, sort of Pluto being the chief dwarf planet or the ambassador or whatever, and are the other dwarf planets facets, uh, of Pluto, or are they all as standalone planets
Well,
in their
I
own right?
probably both as I'm starting to think about, as I've been thinking about this, because first of all, Pluto definitely dominates the area.
Hmm.
It is the largest, and the next time you see a large one like that is Eris, and Eris is twice as far out, plus
Yeah,
more, a little more.
yeah,
But I think Pluto has such power and is able to live up to this will to power focus and control, because it understands all that's probably, when someone has a really good handle, like maybe a very benefic conjunction,
mm,
supported conjunction, or something like that. And in fact, I was trying to find some people that would exemplify that, and I couldn't find anything really quickly. I was able to find a lot of criminals, who do the negative, but think of it, a central person, somebody who's like the head of a company, who's also not necessarily trying to get over on people, but probably wants to do good business. They
mm,
have to know all the things. It's just they can't do all the things. They can, if you're going to be in charge, you cannot do everybody's job.
you
And
have
that's
to
why I started to
delegate,
think this is
delegate.
helping me, that you have to delegate, right? And
Yeah,
and
of
but you still have to know enough that you know that someone's doing that job, right?
course.
But
Yeah,
it's just
yeah.
there's no way. And if you flip it over to the criminal thing, the mafia
The
boss,
underworld.
he wants to
Yeah,
kill people, but there's a couple reasons why he doesn't want to go do it. For number one, he'd be getting exposure, and number two, he's got to keep the center so that all these other enterprises are going. So that's why he
yeah,
needs a Haumea guy, right? And
yeah,
to go do that. And that's why one of the good examples I have of that, and I don't know if you want me to share my screen, I could
yeah.
show you. Is
Absolutely. Let
all
me
right,
make.
we can
I
worry
know it
about that
won't
later.
work for some reason.
Okay,
Not to
so
worry.
when Osama bin Laden wanted to attack the United States, he needed
Mm,
a Muhammad Atta to to do the dirty work. And actually, he came up with the plan. He came up with this awful plan of using the airliners. And look what he's got. He's got Sun conjunct Haumea, because I
hmm,
use H and M because I
hmm.
figure I gotta those little icons. No, people are like, "What the heck is that?" I mean, you're probably saying, "Well, what the heck is this?" This is an unnamed dwarf planet I'll talk about later, but Sun Haumea. I mean, he was you know, somebody who had no problem. He knew he would lose his life. This was a, you know, he was a little crazy. Look at that Mars Maki Maki,
Yeah.
and he was determined. And he'd also, you know, with the Jupiter there, he's probably, well, that actually, you know, that's exactly where Osama bin Laden's Jupiter is. If I can think about
Right.
it, I think he's got Jupiter in Virgo too.
Yeah.
So they have you know, the religious exuberance that's a little, you know, too defined on, you know,
Mm,
something that's not, it's not, you know, love of mankind. It's like, well, you know, we have this definite plan that we want to get rid of our enemies. But what's really interesting, and I guess I can show this, I'm not really sure. We're at 24. Right, where's the 24 guy? Ah, well, it's not going to show it to me. When he, I'm going to just go get the progression. Do you see this? Okay.
yeah. Yeah. That's
Okay.
good.
So, and secondary progression, look what happened. So on September 11th, Mars reaches Haumea, and you know, and Venus, Venus, and his progressed sun is sextile Maki Maki. It's a crazy thing he did, and also his progressed sun is opposite Eris. It's against, you know, these enemies, these perceived other people, that, you know, these Americans, that everything, if we could only just kill all the Americans, we would have, you know, peace on earth.
Mm, mm,
It's that that's the way I read Eris, is that it's generally other people. It's not necessarily women or female warriors, warrior princesses rather. It's just other people, and this was his most antisocial moment, when he did this crazy thing, and
yeah. It's that's a really good word for Eris, because it can be really antisocial because it upsets the apple cart and it just
mhm,
causes complete disruption,
mhm,
without a
mhm.
doubt.
And you
Without a
see, I
doubt.
mean, this is a terrible day. You know, if you knew this guy, you knew he's trouble, because look at that stationary Mercury
Stationary
opposite
Mercury.
Sedna. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just, he's just, and the with Pallas, the warrior, the now there's the warrior princess, usually trying to do good, but in that Scorpio, with this in this terrible opposition, that's like frightening. I don't know, have a time for him, so I'm just using a general sunrise chart,
Yeah.
but I think it's, you know, it still says so much. And that's the other thing about dwarf planets, is I feel that they can tell you so much without you having to know the time, because most of the time when you're using the time,
Slower
you're
moving.
depending on the
Yeah.
houses,
Yeah.
and you're depending on the moon, but
Yeah.
you don't have to do that, have that dependence. There's so much detail that's added that you can, you know, I mean, if you didn't know Sedna was there, what are you going to do? Um, or
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
Maki Maki and
Absolutely.
Haumea, those are the big four are Eris, Maki Maki, Haumea, and Sedna. Those are the four editions that are
Yeah.
almost virtually required now. So just wanted to say
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
here he's
Absolutely.
activated. He's activated, and his son actually, because I think wasn't it, his son was 8. So Haumea has actually
Yeah. Conjunct
sat right
Haumea.
onto his son. Isn't that something?
Yeah, and then progress Mars comes along and activates it. Yeah, and I've been thinking so much about Haumea recently, because obviously that's
Uh-huh.
been the focus of a lot of recent work. And I go back to the myth with Haumea, because I think Haumea is such a double-edged sword. It's either incredibly creative or
Hmm.
incredibly destructive. And I was thinking back to, we just go back to Hawaii, the myth, etc., and she's mother goddess of the island. But we just think of these volcanoes,
Hmm.
bubbling away underground, all that pressure, waiting to explode, just waiting, and you never quite know. And then these volcanoes explode, and it can be so destructive, devastating, loss of life, etc. But at the same time, volcanoes create new land. They're
Yeah.
creating something new, and that's why we have the double-edged sword. And that's what I was thinking back to, because everyone in the astrological world's talking about Israel at the minute, aren't they? we're all
Sure.
looking at the charts and picking apart all these different charts for
Mm.
Palestine, Israel, etc., etc. And you know, I've been doing exactly the same. But if we strip it back a little bit, you know, it was the 7th of October, wasn't it, when Hamas
Yes.
attacked and took the
Right.
hostages, etc. Mars was building to that conjunction with Pluto. And then I think that conjunction exacted on the 12th of October at 0 Scorpio.
Mm.
Okay.
Mm.
And that's when Israel started full on with its retaliation. You know, absolutely brutal. It's the very shadow of Scorpio, all that death,
Yeah.
destruction,
Yeah.
revenge. It's sheer revenge and
Mm-hmm.
brutality, and the very worst of Scorpio, isn't it? Um, and then I kind of got looking back to you know, the start of that Israeli conflict, which was 1948, and we
Right.
had you know, Pluto. You know, if we go to the 50s, we had Pluto and Haumea conjunct for much of the 50s
Mm-hmm.
in Leo. So we had a
Right.
conjunction. So I'm kind of thinking these hard aspects between Pluto and Haumea, you know, that they're both energies that can be incredibly destructive. Okay. And I just wonder when they come together and then they're triggered, it can just pull out all the destructive potentials of Haumea, and that
Mm-hmm.
volcanic eruption just waiting to start. And you know, just a couple of weeks before the Israeli-Arab conflict really kicked off in 1948, we had Mars Haumea conjunct in Leo, you know, and we had
Mm-hmm.
several of those conjunctions throughout the 50s,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. I
all
mean, they were,
split.
well,
And
even going back to 45,
yeah,
is the Hiroshima is Sun, Haumea, and
exactly. Yeah,
and Pluto,
they were all
which I
in
don't
Leo.
think I pulled that out. But one thing that's funny is I mean that really convinced me that there's something really huge about Haumea when I saw that conjunction, because we've all looked at the Hiroshima chart before then. It's like, okay,
Hmm.
well, it didn't seem big enough. It didn't seem big enough. And actually, there's another body there that's in that conjunction, which is unnamed and probably will not be named because these astronomers are getting tired of astrologers, grabbing those mythological names and running with it. But that doesn't mean we're going to be stopped. We can still find it out with chart work because, again, when I started, it was uh Maki Maki was called Easter Bunny, and
Yeah,
Haumea was called Santa,
yeah,
and you didn't have anything but that. And I mean, in retrospect, there was more. It was more interesting because as far as Maki Maki, I thought, well, coming out with Easter at a time when there was a shocking thing that happened 2,000 years ago when people walked out and this dead man was gone, and suddenly there was all these reports that he's walking around and he's come back from the dead, and
yeah,
yet they weren't screaming and running. It was this good thing. So all very surprising, right? So
yeah.
that was, but I never thought of that at the time. It was only through the charts that I came up with the shock thing, and then in retrospect I thought, oh, the Easter thing actually works, of the shock of this
It
unusual
does.
miracle.
It does. It
But
does
Santa
because
was like the terrible gift. I actually thought that there's something terrible thing, but somehow it's a good thing because that was came a lot of the initial thing was uh, some terrible things had happened to me, and yet I knew they were good in the long run. And they were came at as Haumea actually did square my son,
mhm,
and I got fired, which actually I knew by that time. I knowing about Haumea, that really helped. I needed to get away from that job. Also, my stepmother had passed away, and I found out she had changed her will against what my dad was told her to put me in with her children. She cut me out 6 months after he died, and I didn't find that out until she passed away 2 years later. But it was at this Haumea Square, my
yeah,
son. And yet, so these were terrible things, and yet I was able to move on from them and actually get some closure because now I didn't have to deal with her I knew what the score was. Everything was going to, I could it was a cutting of a cord, right? It's very much that what is the fates cutting the cord of life, and yet there's a good thing about it because you feel some freedom. So I started to feel that was what it was about. But I needed to see it more and more and more. And again, the Hiroshima one, and also I saw the Krakatoa, the 1880 Krakatoa one, where that just completely obliterates that island. I mean, that there you go. So there was no only in time was there new growth after that
Yeah,
Krakatoa, but there was actually
yeah.
another just in the last 10 years. There was the Krakatoa Anak
Mhm.
actually also had an eruption. So, but you're right. It's so there's something good that comes about. That's why I said terrible gift. And that kind of
It's
just
that
happened to work
double-edged
well with
sword.
Santa, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. That double-edged sword, without a doubt. And, you know, just that volcano thing as well. It's like these wars or conflicts that erupt, they don't just happen overnight. They're bubbling away. The pressure's building up for months and months and years beforehand. And then if we do take Haumea as the trigger, or when Haumea is triggered, the volcano does erupt. And that's what we've seen in Gaza,
Hmm.
recently.
Yeah.
So, and you can go back to sort of many other sort of conflicts. I mean, the world's never been free of conflict. You can go to any period in
Oh
history,
yeah.
and there's conflict there as well. But I do think Haumea is prominent in many, and we even go back to the 1700s, and we had the last stretch of Mars Haumea conjunctions in Scorpio, and we had the likes of the 7 Years' War back in the
Hmm.
1700s. And very similar to Israel, it's a fight over land. They were all fighting over land and the resources, that Scorpio Taurus dynamic. And so I think we get more detail about the point of eruption for a conflict when we look at
Hmm.
Haumea as well. And Mars Haumea, it's typical, proper sort of Mars is like a catalyst, isn't it? It's just like firing the gun. That's it. Haumea, volcano burst. And
Mars is supercharged by Haumea, but
yeah,
you're right. There's the
absolutely.
potential, and maybe there's that potential here with I mean, right now Israel, the powers that be in Israel are just super worried. They thought that they were going to somehow have some kind of way of living in some uneasy truths type of thing. And it just and it's their own fault too. They
Yeah,
really missed all these warning signs and stuff.
yeah.
And they got lax. I mean, it's amazing how they just completely overwhelmed those all the money defenses they had. But maybe some down the line they're going to have to figure out something, because what? So they're going to completely destroy these people so that the other people that remain are going to just totally be hardened against Israel being there still.
Yeah,
Something
it's
has
that
to happen.
I know that Pluto Haumea combination, it is death and destruction, when we see it in its worst form, without a doubt. And it's just
I mean,
like,
it's got that potential, but
yeah,
remember that
yeah,
in 1954 you had the Salk vaccine. So there you have Pluto Haumea is the injections of the killed virus. So you had this deadly thing that's been neutralized, and now it's I'm sure the kids didn't
healing.
want to
Yeah.
be inoculated, and yet that is going to heal them. So there's the healing in the good
Oh,
part comes through.
absolutely. And I talked about that in at the AA conference, all the healing and the wonderful potentials, because how Haumea, whether we're looking at the destructive side or the creative side, how Haumea is so pregnant with creative possibility and creative
Yeah.
potential. I
Yeah.
always think how Haumea is just pregnant in whichever form. We're seeing, the Haumea being pregnant with destruction in Israel, But on the flip side, we're seeing so many advances in technology and AI and medicine, and the sort of wonderful sort of creative side of Haumea's sort of pregnant potential, so to speak. So yeah, it's powerful without a
Hmm.
doubt.
Hmm.
Very powerful. Mm.
So if I could show you something, maybe
Yeah,
on, you know what, be
yeah,
on to the Hiroshima bombing I was saying
yeah,
earlier.
yeah,
And here you have Pluto, Sun, Haumea, and this is 2013 FY27. You know, big mouthful there.
yeah.
I sometimes call it the hollerer because people who have it prominent uh, can can really project, and sometimes they shout like Sam Kennison. I don't know if you've ever seen the co
Really?
comic Sam Kennison. He used to go ah ah ah. He was always talking about people who were freaking him out or women who
Yeah,
were always bothering him, and he would scream into the microphone. And also Gilbert Gottfried, who would talk very loud. He was the one who played the parrot in Aladdin. Hey, what am I talking to you? When are you going to get that lamp? You know, he had this really annoying voice, which wasn't his voice. That was his shtick. And all of them have FY27, the hollerer, in their chart. And when I started working with FY27, so I can't remember who kind of nudged me about it because it has a moon, a rather large moon. It's kind of almost like a double dwarf planet. You know, it's got a it's got a common center of gravity, if I recall correctly. And so you know, ran into the fact that it was here, and I'm thinking, well, that's this huge boom, right? I mean, because when that happened, there was this incredible mushroom cloud and complete ear-shattering explosion. And I thought that was kind of interesting that this gives more emphasis to this terrible moment and of this destruction and the ability of the US now to take control of the Japanese because now they know they can be wiped out. That there's it's not just, you know, each one is going to you know, sacrifice their own lives for their country. The whole country is going to be sacrificed. No, they weren't. Nobody was ready for that. Okay, we can actually surrender now because, and even the emperor said, "This is it. We cannot have our culture go down. It's just, it's too much." So that I felt was even more convincing. But the thing that I wanted to point out to you, which I find is very interesting, and I guess I'm gonna just try to, maybe I should take one of these and do a clock on it. This is right now. And what I wanted to point out to you is as Pluto and Haumea now are, you know, getting into square position,
yeah,
one thing they're going to do in a few years is they're going to pick up the hollerer because you just saw it at what's 18 degrees of Leo, and all
yeah,
this time it's just gone 30 degrees. It's very slow.
yeah,
So it's not going to move very much. It's when it gets, it's going to be around 18 or 19 when Haumea and Pluto are going to be squared at 3 and 4 of the fixed signs, right?
yeah, yeah,
And so this is potentially that these guys are together again, right? This is they're going to form this big this square with this semi-square and sesquiquadrant attached to it of FY27. But what I'd like to think, and I think it's not going to be out of line, is that this is going to be scary, but it's not going to be an atomic, it's not going to be nuclear war. It's not going to even be Putin finally drops the bomb on Ukraine. But it's going to, but it's actually, I think it's even right now almost already happening in that Putin has been in the last 2 years saying, "Oh, I guess I'm going to have to consider some nuclear, you know, some targeted nuclear options or whatever." And he's just bluffing.
yeah,
He's just bluffing. And since it's semi-square and sesquiquadrate, I think this is what that's going to mean. You know, I'm going to scare your pants off, hopefully, but it's not. It's not that. You know, it's just going to be a lot of loud talk, right?
Yeah.
But I do think that there are going to be times in the next few years as we go through these exact squares
Mm.
that with FY27 involved, uh, there's going to be terrible deafening storms where we are going to have people be in natural disasters. So I think there are going to be times. I just don't think that a human is going to engineer it. I think it's just the climate change is really going to get scary. These all like Acapulco was just destroyed,
Do,
and
do
of course
you know
the
what,
town
Sue?
in
Is
Maui.
and it was barely in the news. It was barely in the news.
I know. I mean, I actually was visited Acapulco for a little bit of time, and so I was kind of like, "Oh my God, is the place that I lived at destroyed?" And I was really surprised. And I think
Mm.
it's just the Ukraine war, and then I don't think was Israel already
I think it was
uh,
bubbling. Yeah,
okay.
bubbling.
I didn't know if it had started yet or not when Acapulco got hit
Yeah.
by that hurricane, but you're absolutely right. But I think it's going to be more of these places are going to get, towns are going to get wiped out, and more people are going to get frightened. And actually, that is going to be a good thing because if people are going to start voting and start pushing politicians to do more, to find some ways to cut emissions and start to draw
Mhm.
down and try to avoid these killer cyclones, that's going to be a good thing.
It is,
So
and that,
that's just my thought.
yeah, and no, you're so right. And it takes me back to the 1950s again with that Pluto Haumea conjunction in Leo,
Hmm.
because we had a massive leap forward in our understanding of climate. Scientists started understanding about carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere. Um, and they started. I wrote this down before because there's no way I'd remember it, but
Yeah, here they are to get at that time. This is
yeah,
early
perfect,
55.
perfect.
Can you
So
believe it?
the likes of Edward Teller, so it was some American oil industry event, I think it was the centennial,
Hmm.
said this was in the late 1950s. He said it's been calculated that a temperature rise equating to a 10% rise in carbon dioxide will be enough to melt the ice cap and and sort of drown New York. So the 1950s, the scientists really started arguing about the rising levels of carbon dioxide.
I really had not known that until you've been mentioning it. Wow. That's
Yeah,
that's that's
yeah,
That's good,
it's
except, unfortunately, but I don't blame anyone for having acted earlier than now. Don't you think with what we see of what's happening now with Pluto Haumea, that it had to get bad? First of all, people were not going to act if maybe something was going to come up, and it would have been premature in some ways for the people to have gone nuts. It's only in retrospect we think, oh, what if we hadn't, done something? But I feel that we are at the time where it's now so pregnant a problem that we are going to be forced to act, and we're going to have
absolutely
technology to help us. I think with, of course, the what is it, fission or fusion? I can never remember which one it was, but you
nuclear.
guys in
Yeah,
UK
yeah,
have a fission plant, and we
yeah.
do, and it's only working for 10 seconds, but it's going to get better.
Yeah. I think, and I wonder if AI might be able to help us come up with some solutions. But I've got a lovely, lovely little story about the climate change thing I've just
Okay.
talked about. So we
Okay.
go back to the sort of the 1950s, that period, and scientist called Charles Keeling, he kind of confirmed the greenhouse gas effect type thing.
Okay.
And what he did, his theory was all done sort of measuring all the carbon dioxide, and it was done up a mountain in Hawaii. That's
Ah,
where he developed the theory from, in Hawaii. And I just thought, oh my God, that's so Haumea, so Haumea.
yes.
And he, in his natal chart, he has Haumea at 29 Cancer. And of course, we've got Pluto opposite that now by transit.
Yes.
Um, and he his natal chart, he has Sun at 0 degrees Taurus, and we have Haumea at 0 Scorpio opposite. But I
Yeah,
just thought
yeah,
that was such a
that's a
lovely
good
little
one.
story that he developed that theory, or confirmed the theory, because it was actually proposed back in the I think the 1800s by a Swedish scientist called Svante Arrhenius. I
Oh
just
wow.
discovered this afternoon, so I need to sort of look into that a little bit more.
Oh, those are really good ones. I mean,
Yeah,
and that's
yeah.
important because if we can link these to these positions you're talking about,
Mm,
I think that is going to really turn heads because if you can show
yeah.
correlations like that, that means that this is going to be useful. And I feel like
Mhm.
the dwarf planets give us timings that
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
are are um are going to impress down the line.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
My
absolutely.
only good example that I've been able to engineer, and it was just because, in this country it was such a existential crisis, is when Trump came along, and when he was elected, I mean, Saturn was opposite his sun. And I had been laughing, saying, he's not going to get elected. Saturn's opposite his sun. Ron Reagan couldn't even get a primary win when Saturn was opposite his sun. It's not a time when you're lucky. And it's a terrible time. And when that happened, I said, you know what? This is the most terrible thing that's happened to Donald Trump. And so he's going to screw up something horrible. And then I started to say, when is that day coming?
Yeah.
When is he going to do the dumbest thing in the world? And I worked on that, and I mean, I actually have it on my website. It's this series called Donald Trump won't isn't leaving until. And it's because I said, Saturn has to be in some negative thing with the US sun, and there has to be
Yeah.
transits that are negative to Trump, and there has to be progression negative to Trump, and there has to be the US, the United States Declaration of Independence chart has to show something terrible. And I found that date where all of these things met, and it was around September 22nd, 2019, right? And I found that early in 2018. And I started by the summer, I decided to go out on a limb and I started writing this multi-part series that ended early at September 2019. And I didn't know what was going to happen. I knew it was
Mhm.
just going to be something really ridiculously outrageous because it was going to make Nancy Pelosi say, oh God, we're going to have to impeach him, right? So as that month go on, and I wrote this article saying, here we are, this happy day, this month that we've been waiting for, that we lived so long to get to. And yet again, I didn't know what it'd be, but by the middle of the month, there was this thing suddenly on the news about a whistleblower. And I'm
Yeah.
like, ooh, could this be it? Could this be it? And I went like, on tenterhooks. And then it started coming out like he was on the phone and and then suddenly we thought he said something to Putin, and no, it was Zelensky, and like, what? And it was just trickling out, and then the 22nd was a Sunday, and I'd already kind of walked back and said, well, maybe it'll be the 23rd, because I'm thinking, what could he do on a Sunday? That would be so bad. But there was a Mars thing on that Sunday that I really felt he was going to really just totally screw himself up. But while that was starting to happen on that weekend, and it was coming out that he had refused to give weapons unless he got a favor, the favor was to investigate Biden, and it was now really terrible, the details that were coming out. And that Sunday he walked out to the press before he got on a helicopter, and they asked him, did you did you do this? Did you like ask him to investigate Joe Biden? And he goes, yeah, I asked him. And then one of the congressmen who later was on the impeachment thing said he impeached himself in saying that on that Sunday. So I should have kept with Sunday, but it worked. I actually did it, and I wouldn't have done it as well if I hadn't known that he had a Maki very close semi-square to his progressed Maki sun a semi-square Maki in progression, exactly at that point, and I knew he was going to just do something crazy.
Yeah.
But that was the only indicator I had in progression, and it had to be everywhere. It had to be everywhere
Yeah.
for him to do it. So it's possible, but you need dwarf planets.
You do without a doubt, because I'm sure there's not a single astrologer out there who hasn't looked at someone's forecast at some point and say, well, I didn't see that coming. I missed that. Why is it not showing up?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. We do
And
need
and
those
and that's
extra. Yeah.
and dwarf planets are the reason why most astrologers, you do have a client and you do the transits, and then you do the secondary progression, and then
Yeah.
you pick and choose, and you make your timeline with both of them together. And why would it be that? It's because one is filling in the blanks,
Yeah.
filling in the dwarf planets that you didn't have back then.
Hmm.
And they do it in reverse. The transit fills in the dwarf planets you're missing in progression.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a neat thing that we have. Actually, they're both complete patterns when you have everything, and that means the one is a fractal of the transits. Secondary progression is a fractal
Yeah.
copy of transits, and that in itself is exciting. And I think scientists would start to go, "Ooh, really?" You know?
Mhm.
You mean they're saying the same thing in maybe different ways, which is exactly what we're talking about.
We get echoes, and echoes of repeating themes when we're looking at forecasting. And the more one theme is echoed and repeated, the stronger the theme is, without a doubt. Yeah, we see that all
Yes,
the
yes.
time.
Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah. In nature, it's a natural thing. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I do wonder if, because let's face it, astrology is a complicated sort of um, art, science, whatever you want to call it. I don't really mind what people want to define it as, but there's a lot of work, there's a lot of skill involved. And I do wonder if, for some people, the thought of adding even more bodies into the chart is a bit overwhelming. It's kind of like there's more to learn, there's more to interpret, there's more to understand, and I totally get that. I really do. But if we go back, throughout history, you know, think of when only up to Saturn was used, and then
Yeah, yeah.
Uranus came along, Neptune came along, Pluto came along, and they're considered completely normal now. And most
Hmm.
people wouldn't even consider not including the outer planets in the chart, or
I
not
know,
even
I know.
including Chiron. They're just the standard. So, I do think that the dwarf planets will become more and more integrated. Um,
It's
but
common though to resist. It's
of
common.
course, of
Scientists
course.
who always feel that they're so open-minded, you have like a Mitchell Feigenbaum come along who discovers an incredible stuff with chaos theory, and he can't get
Yeah,
published
yeah.
because they say you're going to ruin your career. You don't want to go down that road because nobody's going to be able to solve turbulence.
Mm,
And yet he ended up, before he passed away recently, the head of a department about the whole theory. But science can't do it. Astrologers are also, just, I got good results, I don't want to, do anything more with another planet. But even when you go back to Kepler was doing it around 1600,
mm,
wonderful things with astrology, but nobody ever said, except for, the guy who came up with the Uranian planets, nobody ever said we're lacking planets.
mhm.
It's only Alfred Witt, I think it is, who said, yes, they're out there, and I'm going to find them, and I'm going to put them out there. And unfortunately, we've never found those planets. But
I
yeah.
know, but it is that case of, well, it's working fine as it is. I'm quite
Mhm.
happy. I don't need anything else. And it's a case of saying, yes, it might be working fine, but it can work even better if you start integrating these dwarf planets. So yeah,
You have to see where there were holes, and then, and like I said, I had felt there was an opportunity when I read compute that it was in a astrology book of essays when someone complained about the Princess Diana thing, and I said, well, answering somebody who already had a question especially it was a large community of people in Britain astrologers who said, you know, why did this happen? And this is a mystery. And then say, here is the answer. That's the way you know, time and again, it might make a difference.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think it's just every little difference starts building up, and then it becomes a big difference.
It
And I think,
it
yeah,
I think that you know, there's definitely something coming on that. I actually let me, and I know we're kind of getting now, we're all off on over it's like about almost it's quarter of one and so
yeah, it's
it's
quarter past six
10:15.
here. Yeah.
Okay, so we're a little into the next hour. But let me show you a couple things from that I wanted to point out if I could. Uh, Maybe it'll be easier to show you this. Oh, wait a minute. I guess I gotta, I'm not sharing, am I yet? Did I
I
stop sharing? Didn't I? I'm
think
like
you
an
must
idiot.
have. No, that's
I
fine.
did.
Right. No, you're still host. Still host.
No, I didn't go that far
Okay.
in being stupid. But
That's
this is a mechanism I created. I don't know if you've seen it, but I had it in the astrological journal a couple years ago to show just about the Tarnis epochs. And just look down here just to start. Here's Pluto square Haumea. And we're looking at from 2000 is over here on the
yeah.
left, and that's 2100 is over here on the right. But if it runs over, like with the how Pluto and Haumea, they're in orb as squared till 2123, and then
Yeah.
actually in the 23rd century they do some more, which I think you're aware of. I think
Yeah.
you I
Yeah.
remember that you said it.
Yeah.
But here's so this is this long bass note, right? But what's really interesting is there's these clusters of things that you can see happening at the
Hmm.
same time, and some actually are looking pretty good. Like here's right now 25, 26, 2025, and 2026. You're having uh a, Neptune sextile Pluto and
Yeah.
Uranus trine Pluto and Uranus
Yeah.
sextile Neptune. I mean, this is kind of a very nice time here as we're dealing with this. And then we're coming up with these oppositions with Neptune opposite Maki Maki and Neptune conjunct Eris. And I see these lines here, like there's this orange line and this green line
Mhm.
and then this purple line. I'm had in my AA journal article say that I think these are milestones that astrologers might be able to hit
Mhm.
for having a breakthrough in astrology because you know that's the one thing Tarnis was very much hoping for, that just as Copernicus rewrote what the heavens were like,
Yeah. Yeah.
he said we are going to have a breakthrough. But my argument in my articles about his theories was you need dwarf planets for this breakthrough, and I've you know been trying to you know make output so that I can you know be available, that things will be available like my book or my you know
Mm.
articles or whatever when these moments come in the middle of this century, and the other one is in the middle toward you know about 2/3 of the way into the 2030s. um but I just felt that something that's really exciting is the opposite to Haumea with Neptune and the Maki Maki opposite Eris, because
Paris.
those are similar to actually the Principia, the Mathematica Principia, which is was the real point where the Copernican solution to the heavens was accepted. Copernicus was just the beginning. And
Mhm.
so you don't see that it really gets any traction except within very small groups, kind of like how astrology is now. But
Absolutely.
you
Yeah.
needed to have a really, you know, somebody very gifted that comes forward and just brings everything together. And you know, who knows who that will be. That's probably a little late for me. I'll be like 90 and in 2045. Yeah. So I mean, my mom's about to turn 90, but still I'm not going to expect it. But I certainly want to have, you know, be part of the stepping stones and help whoever that is who's going to be trying to
Absolutely.
doing that. But I think it's possible. And I was just really excited they haven't made it happen. It just
Yeah.
makes sense that there's got to be something new, you know?
And then we just go back to the times before the outer planets were discovered, and then the resistance to sort of integrating them. And so really, have we come much further? In some ways we haven't, because we still have that resistance, because it takes work to understand all these
Mhm.
additional bodies, and it takes work to, you know,
And
sort of
in these cycles, the
integrate
intra-cycles,
them.
because
Yeah.
you have to one thing that why I'm arguing so much about Neptune Haumea being maybe this is it, is because that opposition hasn't happened since the Principia. That's not, it's not like that's when it happened and it's happened on and on. That
Mm,
hasn't happened since.
yeah.
So it's like that could be a long enough time that it could be the breakthrough one, because it's like Neptune, it's got to be a change for everything.
Yeah.
And I can even argue this one. When Neptune and Haumea were conjunct, there was a big change. That was special relativity. That was
Really?
1905 when it
I've never
came out,
studied that
and
cycle.
and curved, space time is curved. I mean, that just blew people's mind. And but it was correct. It was correct, and they finally proved it by beyond a doubt. It took a 15, 20 years and stuff, but
Yeah.
or 15 years, but that was the conjunction, and the conjunction of Haumea Neptune was opposite Uranus at the time, Uranus and
Right.
Gongon for that matter.
Yeah.
So it was a very, you know, very sensitive amount of you know, of intellect that had to be
Mm.
put toward that for him to have gotten that theory. I'm still not completely sure how he came up with it in my own mind, but
Do you know what I think
yeah,
with Haumea as well? It definitely has that dynamo effect, and there's this vast churning
yeah,
of
yeah,
creative output. And if you've got that incredible scientific mind there in the first place, you
mm,
just need Haumea to come along, and it's going to churn it up, and it's just going to keep coming, all that
yeah,
creativity,
yeah,
poof, out there,
yeah.
like just yeah, yeah,
Oh, and that was one thing, you know, I can tell you now, because you know we're not going to be talking too much longer. I don't want to miss this, but you know, I had that question in my mind that I was expressing to you about how do we you know, evaluate all these, not just these new planets, but these different cycles that Pluto is making with them, and
yeah,
which is so important, and how do
yeah.
we, you know, put the point on it that Haumea Pluto cycle. I mean, we can look at it here and
Mm.
actually, if I go back to my slideshow, if I can try to find where I had the yeah, these are how I kind of the Pluto, the cycle of individuality. But here's the modern era, which you're aware
Yeah,
of
yeah,
1517, fifteen sixty
yeah,
four, the first couple, and then 1732, which you were talking about just now about the land wars.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. The 7 Year War, which is
and
in the
then
mid
there's and
1750s.
I've mostly just, you know, kind of set down who was born at these times. There's so
Yeah,
many ways you can do it, but there's some
absolutely.
of
Yeah.
it light bulb perfected around Einstein's being born, and then these, and of course you can see this is a little older, this PowerPoint, so we hadn't
Mm.
gotten to the first square.
Yeah,
um but this was the Greek miracle Roman Empire of Socrates and Plato were born in the first two conjunctions. And then it was a great general that was born, Hannibal. and about the same point where in our time was Washington. And there
Great,
were
great
there,
general. That's so Pluto Haumea. Haumea gives birth. She gives birth, and then Pluto is this great, powerful general.
yeah.
So
And
Pluto
you
Haumea.
know, he was one who you know brought the elephants over the
Yeah,
Alps to
yeah.
attack the Romans, and the Romans had a thing where they'd say Hannibal's going to get you. You know, they would scare their children with this, and then of course when Hannibal did show up, then they were really sorry because he did kind of run amok over in Italy. But then Julius Caesar and the Jesus parents and the society that kind of was then affected by Jesus of Nazareth was the
Mm,
last one. So interesting. And then I go through these other ones. So this is how I deal with the history, which in itself, you know, you'd think that they'd say, oh, wow, these are the conjunctions and then the oppositions. Well, I actually have that somewhere here, I guess.
uh,
Like here's the squares that lead to the oppositions in the previous time, which were the fall of Rome. And these are the
yeah,
last. There's actually a few more squares before this, starting with Caligula.
yeah, 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 yeah.
But then Muhammad, he's actually very much in the opposition where you know where people now have become so lax and dissipated, and he said, well, I somebody needs to come forward to bring us back so that we're you know good to one another, and we're aligned with God and everything. And then of course he's praying about this, and he says an angel came out and said, well, you're going to do it. And he's like, what? I don't want to do it because proclaim. And then he runs away, but he does do it kind of like a St. Paul kind of thing
Yeah.
where you know he didn't want to be the one, and then he got chosen. But then that also ran amok too. You know, this opposition was kind of had an instability about it, and it was an individual. It didn't help people as individuals. It was a group thing. And then Charlemagne kind of came around at the end, and then you know, kind of puts a kibosh on the Islamic expansion. And then then again the squares begin. So all this stuff really should be very convincing that these are really valuable to know, especially if
In-
you're governing. But
Incredibly valuable.
I was thinking, is there anything else we can have? And you know, one thing that occurred to me is the fact that um, I'm sure you've heard the fact that Jupiter is the planet of excess and it's the largest planet. All the planets could fit inside Jupiter, right? Even Saturn.
Yeah.
And Saturn is restriction. And what do you see? You see it in a telescope and it's got these bands around it. It's being restricted. And, you know, these are Mars being red like blood. All these
Mm,
things are just wonderful that the physical properties have some way you know, and that weren't known at all when these planetary qualities were determined hundreds of years ago. That was not known, these details. So I started to think, wait a minute, wait a minute. I think I know how to justify that the Pluto Haumea cycle is so important, and it's because you can look at the physical properties of Pluto. And one of the most unique things about Pluto, he's got that big old moon there,
mm.
Charon. And not only is it a big moon for its own the main body, but it's tidally locked to to Pluto. Now we all know about tidally locked because we have our own moons tidally locked, but Pluto is tidally locked. It when it moves around, it cannot stop looking at Charon. It is holding on to its big baby, and it can't move away. It is totally focused on that moon. And Charon, I feel, is like nearby Haumea. And it's not just a kind of an interesting you know relationship saying that is when Haumea and Pluto get together, Pluto cannot get away from Haumea. Haumea chases it down, and then Pluto has to get away again, and then Haumea chases
I,
it down, and
there's
then
a
Pluto, and
magnetic
that's
quality. They're like
it's
magnets almost. Yeah.
right. And finally Pluto does get away and gets all the way and has either one or three oppositions, but it is going to go back. And those conjunctions are so funny when you think about it. It can't get away, and that you have the actual planet has a moon that's big, but not as big as Haumea, but it's still so significantly big that it's got it tidally locked on it. On the faces are always facing each other, and I just think that is Pluto's physical properties giving us the hint about how important Pluto and Haumea cycle is.
Yeah, absolutely. It's massively important. And I think to make it sort of a little bit easier to understand, we need to then look at all the other planetary cycles going on within it, triggering the cycle itself.
Yeah,
So,
no, absolutely, yeah.
And that's on my list to do. I need to look
Like
at
that.
the
Well,
the
I
next
mean, even like
decade.
when you said the Mars one with the Israeli thing, and actually, I'm trying to think of what it was that I go back to. Oh, this is one I was telling you about, this overturn of Roe versus Wade. Oh, wait a minute, this is not the one, the first one I wanted to do. Oh gosh, where is it? Is it this one? No, I'm not going to find it by looking at the menu. All right. The draft opinion. Okay, so here's the draft opinion that leaked the month before, like 6-7 weeks before.
Yeah.
And here you have Haumea at 2840 and Pluto at 2835. Pluto was getting ready to station, or no, it had already stationed. But Mars, your friend Mars, look how it's semi-square Pluto and sesquisquadrate Haumea. I mean, really close. 4 minutes and 9 minutes.
Those minor aspects are so physical. There's always some sort of physical manifestation or physical action or physical event or result.
And people blew up. People blew up. That people just
Yeah.
came out into the streets, and it hadn't even decided yet. But the anger was just. But again, it wasn't. It was annoying. People were really disturbed, but nobody was killing people. Nobody was doing that. But it was definitely so strong. And I think when you have a Pluto Haumea square like that, that's going to be, a real,
And every
uh,
time that's triggered,
thank
and
you. I
there's
just
going to
can't
be
think of the word.
it's going to be triggered so much over the next decade. So
Motivation, super motivating, super motivating.
well, it is, and squares are all about growth. I know it's a fixed square, so there's going to be resistance. It might not be so easy, but
well, now it'll soon be in fixed squares. But this at this point is cardinal.
It's cardinal,
And
yeah.
And when you think about it, look, we just had on Tuesday, Ohio just voted to enshrine abortion rights in their constitution, and this has been happening in Kansas and all sorts of other states. All these conservative states, they are going, no, no, you are not going to make my daughter have a baby when she is either raped, or even if she's with
Yeah.
some guy that I don't want have him in my family ever.
Yeah. Wow.
Anyway, so and that was and that's why I wanted to point that out, because then Roe versus Wade, it really was exact. 2935. And I'm sorry, not that one, sorry. Where is it? Did I pick the wrong thing? No, this is decided.
That was in 1973, wasn't
Oh
it?
shoot. All right. Yeah. No wonder it's the draft. No.
Was it June last
Here it
year when it
is.
was
Here it
overturned?
is. Here's
That's
the
it.
overturn. Here is the overturn.
Yeah.
2756 and then 2756. I mean, I could have, if I had any faith in myself, I could have written something like weeks beforehand and looked like a genius.
Yeah, I know. I know.
All right.
And you know what? Everyone's sort of really focusing on Pluto sort of moving into Aquarius. which is big enough in itself, but it does happen every sort of, what, couple of 250 years, so it's not that unusual. But then it's moving into Aquarius and it's square Haumea, and that puts a whole extra layer of
Well, this is it. People
into
really want
it.
to say, oh, it's hitting that degree that Saturn and Jupiter were at. And
Yeah.
that's true, but I think people realize something big's happening and they just want to find it in the traditional ways. I think that's what might be happening.
Mm.
And I'm surprised also no one said, oh, that's the US Pluto, that Pluto was on the
Yeah, the
same
US
degree.
Pluto Return, exactly. And you know how May's been triggering that. So
Hmm.
yeah, yeah.
And but for good, I think, because when you see these stories of not just these young girls who then can't get an abortion when they're raped, and but these women who are sick and they can't get abortion care because they need it in order to there's been a big problem. They're not going to have a baby, a viable baby. It's whatever has happened, and they have to get so sick before a doctor will do anything because he's worried about losing his license and being
Yeah.
jailed. So it's just there's been a lot of amazing things happening on that front. And again, the childbirth thing is definitely the
Oh yeah,
reproductive thing is really there.
yeah,
But you
absolutely.
brought up a lot of good ones. It's just I thought, well, I could offer to, say, because here in America maybe it'd be more obvious uh,
No,
that
we
we're
talked about
upset
this a
about it.
lot. We talked about this a
Okay.
lot, but obviously so limited. I could have talked for 3 hours at the
Oh
AA
yeah,
conference.
yeah. So
Oh,
you discussed it in the after part. Is that what you mean?
I mentioned it. I mentioned it a little bit in the talk,
Oh,
just with
okay.
the
I must have
relevance.
missed that part. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
I did
I
mention
just
it, but I didn't have time to bring up any charts or anything. But
okay.
it was covered like in the whole sort of reproductive link to Haumea, etc. And Scorpio, of course, Scorpio is so sort of resonant with childbirth, reproduction, abortion, all those sorts of themes, very much so yeah. But yeah, it's just all fascinating, and I just have such a long list of
You're
research
right.
and things
I
I
do
want
too.
to do.
I know. I'm hoping that I won't have different weird things happening, and I can start to knock some more of them off. But it's that's the distractions are terrible when you end up having
I
suddenly
know.
something waylays you. But
I know. And and apart from all the astrology, we are normal people and have lives to live as well.
true. I mean, you have children, don't you? Don't you have
I,
a little girl
I've
at
got a
least?
son. I've got a
A
son.
son. Okay.
He's nearly 13. So no, it's quite cool because he just goes to his room and does his own thing now. A lot of
Okay.
the time. But no, I'm really lucky because obviously I work from home. I work for myself, so I can sort of just choose my hours a lot of the
That's
time.
great.
Yeah,
I've been
so
working at home too, so
yeah,
but
oh, it's
I work
great.
for Caltech, but hopefully that'll keep up. I actually declined to go full time because I don't want to lose the time that I really need to devote to this.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
the money, it would be great, but I don't want to, and I
Yeah.
also thought that they would try to pull me in just in general, like in person. And so I'm going to just try to sit here in my part time, and hopefully they won't think about me anymore. And just let me
Stay under the
do that
radar.
job, and
Exactly. Stay under the radar.
right.